At 6 o'clock and we are live. Hello and welcome to the second music support webinar in association with Thrive and Skiddle. My name is Mark Richardson and I've been fortunate enough to be playing the drums for a living for the last 30 years, mostly with Skunk Anansie, and have been sober for the last 18 of them, which is how I came to train as a transformational and addiction recovery coach, complete my master's focusing primarily on mental health in the music industry, and to be one of the 4 founders and a trustee of Music Support. I'll be your host for this evening's discussion on addiction and supporting recovery in the music industry. If you're not aware of Music Support, we are a charity providing help and signposting for anyone working within the UK music industry who may be affected by mental ill health and/or addiction challenges, and facilitate mental health education via workshops. We also provide training to individuals and organisations in the music industry so they may be better equipped in the areas of awareness, early intervention and prevention. Our partners for this webinar are Thrive, the NHS approved evidence-based smartphone app providing in-depth tools and support for anyone to improve their mental well-being. Thanks to funding from the BPI and the Brits Trust, Music Support is able to provide free access to Thrive for a limited period. For further details, including your exclusive free download code, you can go to musicsupport.org/Thrive app, and we'll post the details in the chat here for you as well. We're also proud to partner with the UK's primary ticket outlet and largest online events guide, Skiddle. To discover more about the challenges and obstacles facing promoters, Skiddle conducted a survey discovering that the majority of promoters feel their mental health and well-being is dramatically affected by their work in the events industry. So it goes without saying that we're extremely grateful for the support of both our partners. Coinciding with the end of Dry January, I hope to facilitate an open and honest discussion surrounding addiction and substance misuse with our panel of industry experts addressing issues including how we spot addiction, how we treat it, can we demystify the 12-step program, what is it and do you need it, how can we support those leading sober curious lifestyles. To help us find our way through this evening's subject matter, we've enlisted a wonderful panel of experts. They include Ronnie Trainer. Ronnie has over 20 years of experience. Hi, Ronnie, in the music industry, from a brief career as a DJ in the early 90s to working at legendary dance label Distinctive Records. She went on to work with Groove Armada on a number of high-profile projects before joining various artists in 2010. She now manages a wide range of talent, including Fanny Anderson, Wen Young, Third Culture Kid. And alongside all of this, Ronnie has been sober for 3 years with a foundation in psychotherapy and a qualification as a transformational life coach. Chula Kumardin, hi Chula, is a classically trained musician who enjoyed a professional career as a drummer in his 20s. Sober since 2003, Chula retrained as a psychotherapist in 2012 after working on the front line of statutory addiction treatment for 7 years. He's now also a clinical consultant specialising in music industry and media professionals, as well as acting as an advisor to public health and the Home Office, lecturing in addiction psychology and counselling at LSU, and being the co-founder and clinical director of Azure Minds. And we'll put all of those details for each of our guests in the chat as well. Dr. Adam Huxley, hi Adam. Is a consultant clinical psychologist, registered psychologist and chartered psychologist. He's an associate fellow of the British Psychological Society and a chartered scientist. He has an honorary appointment as a research fellow at the University of Birmingham and is an honorary lecturer at the Centre for Forensic and Criminological Psychology at the University of Birmingham, and has a specialist interest in addictive behaviours and mental illness. If that wasn't enough, he's also the co-founder of the Thrive app. And last but absolutely not least, John Austrian. Hi, John. Nice to see you. Is a live sound engineer from LA who's been working exclusively with John Legend for the last 10 years. He's also toured with artists such as Van Halen, which is where we met, Toto, Aerosmith, and Bruce Springsteen, and has been a sober member of AA for 36 years. During the pandemic, he has been facilitating much needed online 12-step meetings for crew members in recovery to create a worldwide fellowship for touring personnel in the music industry that hopes to continue long after the pandemic has ended. That's our panel. Welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us. Incidentally, if you'd like to ask me, anyone listening would like to ask me anyone on the panel a question, please use the Q&A button down below. We'll take questions at the end of the session. If we don't manage to answer your questions in the Q&A, please feel free to email us at info@musicsupport.org, and we'll follow up with you afterwards. And that's the intro, and we've got a lot to get through, so let's get to the first point. Chula, can I start with you? I just wanted to ask you, to what extent is addiction and substance misuse an issue in the music industry today, at the moment? What's the current state of affairs?
Well, what I'm seeing is that there's definitely been an increase due to the COVID situation. And whilst I could see that increase in artists, I've actually seen it worst in the crew and people who work behind the scenes who really haven't got anything to do in terms of, a lot of their jobs have been stopped because people aren't touring. And I think that's really where the music industry, if you look at it as a whole, from my perspective, from a therapeutic perspective, and the referrals that are coming through to me, where the music industry is hit hardest. I think artists may be struggling, but and I think they're emotionally or psychologically struggling, but in terms of career and what they're doing artistically or professionally, they've been able to find a way to do it, whether that's going into a studio or writing at home or, just coming up with creative things to pursue. But the people who are actually, have to be physically touring or doing stuff that COVID won't allow, they're the people who haven't been able to work, haven't been getting money, and therefore their mental health and well-being has been suffering greatly, unfortunately.
And is that it's greatly increased compared to previous years? Are you seeing a massive upturn? I read somewhere that we've doubled in terms of alcohol intake, but does that mirror what's happening in the rest of the sort of substance and process kind of in terms of substances and processes, or is it just alcohol?
From what I can see, definitely, yes, I would say so. I've had a lot more referrals since the end of the first lockdown really here. But I do think that people are using those, because we've got to remember that most addictions begin as coping mechanisms. And I think when people are under stress, especially addicts, what we would call addicts, then those coping mechanisms increase or are used more and more intensely or needed, I suppose, by the individual. So there's definitely been an increase, and there are national statistics, I believe, to show that there's been an increase. And unfortunately, in other things such as domestic violence and in the music industry, I have no doubt that alcohol and drugs have played a big part in people's need to get through this difficult time.
Yeah. Adam, would you agree with that? Are you seeing the same sort of things in terms of the Thrive app and what the information that's feeding back to you?
Yes, unfortunately, I think there's probably a sort of steady increase in the amount of people who are reaching out for support where drugs or alcohol are involved. And I think, yeah, I agree with everything we've just heard, really. It kind of makes sense that people would try and find some way to cope with all of the distress that they're under at the moment. And we have to remember that accessing the conventional treatment resources has been reduced significantly. So if we think of, the drug and alcohol treatment services, a lot of them are offering remote consultations only, or have had to find really innovative ways to try and keep their services open. So, yeah, I think there's an enormous amount of pressure on people generally at the moment. And yeah, I think alcohol in particular is a really, really readily available and accessible way to try and manage your way through this period of time.
Are you? What's the feedback? What sort of feedback are you getting from the Thrive app? Is it in terms of are you seeing frustrations on how it's working, or are you seeing lots of people saying, thank God for this? This has really helped.
I mean, to be honest, we've just seen such a surge in terms of usage since the first lockdown began. I mean, I think we'll see, unfortunately, a bit of an uptick in terms of mental health difficulties at the end of this, and services were struggling to manage caseloads even before the first lockdown started. So yeah, we've seen an uptake in terms of people using the app, people using the coaching and counselling service within it. And I think it's really the speed of access that people have been particularly grateful for, because we can support people pretty quickly. There's no waiting list. So, you can see a counsellor, for example, within 24 hours. So we're really proud of that actually at the moment. And yeah, people are using it, which is really important.
That's fantastic. And just those details again for the Thrive app, for the free download code is at musicsupport.org/Thrive app. And again, we'll those details are already in the chat. So Ronnie, what's your experience of this? I just want to get a bit of a look at it from the artist point of view. Can you tell when artists are struggling? Do they come to you? Do you go to them? What's the sort of deal? Because my experience of this was really horrible, and I put my manager in an awful position of trying to find help when there really wasn't a lot of help around, and she did an amazing job of helping me out, as did the band. But what's your experience of it now, in terms of their struggles?
Yeah, I mean, definitely have seen, and it's something that I've experienced a lot in my career. One of the things I decided when I got sober 3 years ago was I decided to use my own personal platforms to talk about it and to own it and talk about my recovery, so that people felt as though it would be out there so they could feel they could share with me. So I'm very open. It took me a while, but I decided to be very open about it. And when I manage new bands, and within our, I'm part of various, we've got 30 or so artists on our roster, I'm very open, and we're very open about the fact that I am a sober manager internally, so that people know that. And by doing that, I have a lot of my own artists. I have one artist in particular who got sober a year ago, came to me because I've been open about my journey. I think that's the thing I found most helpful. And now I help other artists. People reach out to me from all over via social media because they know it can be done anonymously, etc. And I can help them remotely and give them the advice they need. And also internally in my own management company, that people know that if something comes up. So yeah.
Because it's such a different industry, it seems to me, to the one that I got sober in. Is it more open in that sense? Is it more acceptable? Or is it still, you've got to be, do you feel like you lose out because you're not joining in with the carnage kind of thing? Has it changed in that sense, or is it still the...
I think it's harder as a manager to it feels like the younger generation of artists coming up are a little bit, they seem to drink less. It feels maybe because it's so much tougher now. It's much more of a business, it's much of a, it used to be 100 acts making £1 million. It's now 1 million acts making £100. It's a different industry, definitely in the 90s when I first got in, it was carnage. So I'd say, but there's still that culture on the road, culture, drinking culture, etc. I think that still exists. So, but I think there's definitely changing, and I think because there's so many more resources now, mental health, social media. It's it's much more open conversation to have. People will tell you they're openly depressed. When I first started working, I suffered from depression. When I first started working, there's no way I would have brought it up. I worked at a dance label, and I just remember thinking there's no way I would talk about something that wasn't talked about at all. Whereas now it's definitely an open subject.
Absolutely, can totally identify with that. I didn't want to talk about what was going on at all. It was just, not the way you did it. And John, if I can bring you in here, does that ring true for you also in terms of the crew and how, obviously quite closely related, all of these areas, but do you tend to see someone struggling and reach out to them, or are you like Ronnie, are you just open about your sobriety and that's what attracts people to come and talk to you about it?
Well, everybody knows that I'm sober. It's an interesting point. In the early 90s with the carnage, it was everybody was drinking and using, and so they could almost hide amongst the crowd, but you could point out who really had the issues. Nowadays, it's not as well accepted from management down. So those who may be abusing might be doing it on their day off or not so much on the job or what have you. But I think as far as being sober, there's a fine line, at least I've experienced, between being open about my sobriety, yet, not being intimidating or intimidated or accepted or what have you. But enough where if somebody really had an issue that they could feel that they could reach out. But I think it's an interesting point that I think maybe nowadays with the changes that it's easier for people who are abusing to keep that hidden, and not be openly, drinking on the job because it's just unacceptable. But I think there needs to be a lot more awareness from management down on the severity of the issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I think on one of our last tours, there was a chap who, was acting out quite badly, and we pulled him up on it, and he said, "Oh right, I've never been on a tour where it was where I've been given permission not to act out," and so I think still it's still changing, and I think it's probably still going to take a while for things to settle in that sense, and it's like, oh, I'm sober, oh okay, no problem, there's a meeting on a Thursday or whatever. But do you have regular meetings on your tours and stuff like that?
No, I mean, if you keep in mind, I've toured my entire career in sobriety, and it's always been difficult. It's always been almost impossible to maintain that level of maintenance of staying sober and serene and happy when I'm on tour. And I'm now meeting other crew members who've had very similar experiences. And so with the application of Zoom, we're hoping this can really make it work. I think it will. But from my own personal experience, it got so bad that I actually switched addictions while I was on tour. I wasn't drinking or using drugs. But, the nature of the industry is everything's acceptable behavior on tour back in the days, So it's very difficult. I've never been successful at maintaining a happy, sober lifestyle when on the road, but I'm not willing to give up that life and my career. So I really am so excited and hopeful that now we can finally bring all that together and make it one experience. And from the feedback I'm getting, I definitely see that happening.
Right. Chula, when I was floundering around in the early 90s going, what do I do about this? It's not like that anymore. Can you tell, there's like 3 pillars of sort of getting sober we were discussing the other day, if you remember. What do I do if I realize I have a problem? I can't live with it anymore. I'm too, my story was I didn't have it in me to commit suicide, but I didn't know what to do to get sober either. What do I do if I'm a person now, I'm in that situation, how do I spot it? What do I do?
Spotting it in oneself, I think people know. I think we know when we're in a bad place and we know when we're suffering. And I suppose spotting it there isn't really for oneself, isn't the problem. It's having the courage to take that step, to tell somebody else, to make the call, to call music support and say, I need a bit of help, what should I do? To, I suppose switch on to an NA meeting now rather than going to one, and to look for help. That, taking that first step, that's usually the hardest step to make. But then once you've made it, I think things follow much more easily.
Yeah.
And from in terms of managing people and being able to spot it, and I was thinking about this question actually, and I think a lot of it isn't the problem isn't really with not being able to spot it. It's again about courage. It's about having the wherewithal to be able to say to people, look, I can tell something isn't right. What's going on here? And I believe that people around addicts often sort of are a bit frightened of it, and they stay away and they don't really challenge that person or intervene or say, you know, you don't seem okay, you know, what's going on? They just kind of pretend it's not happening and don't really face it. So it's more about having those difficult conversations and being able to approach people. If you're the one needing help, then the people who could help. And if you see somebody who perhaps needs help, it's about having the courage to approach them. And I can't remember those three things. I don't know if you jotted them down. But I think we talked about the sort of principles of recovery, didn't we?
Yeah.
We talked about how, you know, the 12-step programs are sort of ready-built support systems that provide everything that someone needs to recover. And what I pin that down to is kind of fellowship being the number one thing, you know, identifying with people who are on that same journey. And then you've got this kind of program of understanding of what addiction is and sort of achievable goals in the steps themselves that are all about personal development. And then the key thing underneath it for drugs and alcohol is about abstinence. I've seen many people, and I tried myself to control my addictions, and it never really works. But abstinence is the platform that then you can build upon, especially with drugs and alcohol.
Yeah. John, when Chula there mentioned a 12-step program, it's quite a scary thing for a lot of people, you know, stepping over that finding the courage to kind of step into recovery from active addiction is the most hardest thing I've ever had to do. I know now that it takes an incredible amount of vulnerability to be courageous. And I think for me, that's where the crux of it was, you know, it's like I had to get vulnerable and I had to say, I'm done. I need some help. The way I've been doing it isn't working. You know, somebody please take hold of my hand and show me what to do, you know. And I was put in front of the 12-step program. But then I sat down and I saw the word God, and it scared the living crap out of me, you know. Can you demystify a little bit the 12-step program for us? Is it a cult? Is it a religious thing? You know, I hear all of these things on a regular basis. And we laugh because we know as recovering people that's not true. But for somebody, I know people that have gone in, they've seen the steps on the wall, seen the word God, and gone, this is a cult or a religious, you know, fanatic group. I'm out of here. Can you sort of demystify that for us a little bit?
Absolutely. I feel that the addiction will look for any excuse possible to make me leave. So if it interprets a higher power, which is how it's worded in the big book from the most sense, the addiction will say, that's God, that's religion, get out of here. But, you know, I mean, as far as courage goes, I went into the program when I exhausted all resources. I had no other choice. There was nowhere else to go. And I had accepted the fact that if I continued doing what I was doing, I was going to end up in prison or go insane or probably die. I think the courage came later. The bravery came later. And I've recently been hearing about it's a cult, and I don't understand that. I don't understand why somebody would say that my sobriety is a threat to you, that you have to call it a cult. And it's heartbreaking. I mean, we've seen endless amounts of people who try every other thing and then finally come back to this 12-step program. I just like Chula had mentioned, there's no replacing my personal experience of sitting with other members of alcoholics or drug addicts, especially road crew members now, where it is undeniable the relating of the similar problems, experiences, that I know in my heart I'm in the right place. And the constant battle is knowing my truth, knowing what I believe is true, and the addiction continually trying to get me away from this and back into that. And so it's, luckily, most people who come into the program are so beaten that they just don't have that in them for a while until they start to see some light and experience some miracles in their life.
Yeah, I think I totally identify with that. And that was my experience. I was shown initially, told you're an alcoholic, you need to go to AA. I went and I was like, what is this madness? And I spent 3 years, the next 2000 to 2003, just trying to anything but that, and because, and then finally, like you said, I was so beaten and just didn't know, I didn't have anywhere else to go to get better. So none of that mattered in the end, actually. I was just like, there's other people that are trying to get sober. I need to be in that room.
Right.
And
let's take it. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, and I'll do whatever I need to do. That, I'll do whatever they say. That's where I got to.
Yeah. And I think one step further, I'm sober, I'm on the road and I'm a part of this tour, but that doesn't mean I can go and act out sexually or go out and gamble or treat people poorly or on and on and on. And it's how do I narrow that road to a healthy lifestyle and all of that,
Yeah.
And that takes time, I think, but I think it encompasses everything.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. There's a lot of symptoms, to this. So alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, whatever, being just a few of them. This is a huge sort of sway. There's a huge swathe of processes and substances that we're talking about here. Not just alcohol. So, Ronnie, is that sort of true for you? What was your experience of, your first meeting? What was that? We talked about stepping over from active addiction into, that just stepping over that point of like, oh, I'm done, I'm beaten.
Yeah.
What was it like? The 12-step program initially for you?
I mean, there was a sort of a great sense of relief because I was exhausted, absolutely exhausted from trying to, I had so many different ways of trying to meet. I'm only going to drink this type of beer. I'm going to drink all these little tricks and things. And now, I felt, it was that point where I just like, I just can't do this anymore. And I was exhausted. And, I have to say, I definitely, from the outside in, I did think there was a sort of religious cult, that the God thing was, but my first meeting, everyone was just so friendly. And it was funny because I think I started drinking at 14, 13 to try and fit in, and I never did. And it was only when I finally went to a meeting and I finally found my people, I was like, people just, and they accepted me for who I was. And it was amazing. And the steps, in fact, the thing that really helped the steps for me, to get through the steps for me, was Russell Brand's recovery book. And funnily enough, all these little things happen, but I think when you get sober and you start on this sort of spiritual path. But I'd just done step 4 and I'd used Russell's book to get through it. And I went to a meeting and Russell Brand came and sat next to me at a meeting. And I was like, that's crazy. Like, he was like, hey, I'm Russell. I was like, oh my goodness, you've just got me through my step 4. So I really enjoyed his book as a way, because that just helped me bring the step, give them a new fresh look at it. Because obviously they haven't been rewritten. And as a female, sometimes I find maybe they're sometimes a little bit misogynistic, but it was nice to see someone have a fresh take on them.
Yeah, I think, it was 1935, was it? It's a long time ago, it kind of needs updating, really. If I'm going to be a big book heathen, let's just do it. It needs updating. The language needs to change, in my opinion. My opinion is my opinion, not the opinion of music support, by the way. So, I think it really is, if you're in a place, well, let's ask Adam, let's bring Adam back in. With that jumping off point from active addiction into recovery or into treatment, what sort of what do you see in terms of reluctance to kind of get involved? What are the fears, the main fears that people trying to get clean tend to have? And maybe I could open this to Chula as well after, but you know, I'm just trying to get a handle for those listening that may be curious about a sober lifestyle. You know, what are the main fears and what are the main obstacles to it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think probably one of the main fears is that people will fail or they won't be able to achieve their goals. And I think, you know, it takes a huge amount of courage to reach out for support when you're really not sure about your own confidence or your own abilities to be able to make the changes. So, you know, it can be pretty intimidating walking into a treatment service or even an AA meeting to begin with, especially if you haven't had an experience of seeking support before. But I think, you know, it's never as bad as you think it's going to be. And I think for anybody listening that's a bit unsure about whether or not they should take steps to get help, please do, because services are really non-judgmental. You won't be judged at all. They're very welcoming. And I think, as you've heard already, you'll find a support network, whichever treatment service or mutual aid service you go into. So, you know, I think it's absolutely natural to feel a bit anxious about stepping through the door or telling somebody things which are really deeply personal to you. But I think you'll find, I'm sure, that it's going to really help you in your plans to stay abstinent or even reduce the amount that you're using.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, and Chula, you know, Music Support doesn't endorse or promote the 12-step program or Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole, but it's how we've all got sober, so that's why we're talking about it. Is that the only way to get sober?
I don't think it's the only way. I think everybody has to find their path when it comes to recovery. But as I said before, it is a almost ready-made structure that holds people from being in active addiction to a place of sobriety and recovery. So I think it's a very essential step for many people, but there are also people who do it other ways. One thing I think, though, is fundamental that perhaps you don't get from the 12-step programs, or you only get the beginnings of it, is therapeutic support in terms of professional support. Many people who find themselves with addictive disorders, if you sort of go back and back and back to where it started and you look underneath, there is some trauma there. Many people in the music industry use drugs or take drugs. You know, many people in all walks of life, you know, drink and take drugs, but they don't necessarily become addicts, or it doesn't become problematic. And for those of us who it has become problematic, I'd be pretty safe, I think, in saying that most of us would have some kind of trauma in the broadest sense underneath that. So from what I've seen, people who can get, maybe if there's a way of getting what the 12-step programs supply in another way. So if you're getting some kind of group fellowship and peer-to-peer support, and you've got some kind of structure that is going to help you psychologically to get better, and there's therapeutic work being done with a spiritual element, if that's what people feel they need, then I guess that, you know, you can find other ways. But I believe, from what I see when people come into 12-step recovery, at a certain point, maybe 2, 3, 4 years in, often people do need to get professional help for the stuff that's underneath.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And, you know, I think trauma has become, certainly when I talk about it with people that are thinking about getting clean, it seems to be a terrifying word for them. But there's a lot of different kinds of trauma, right? There isn't just like the really, really horrendous type. There's lots of different kinds, is there? Do you want to just have a...
Well, I think it is about understanding trauma in the broadest sense. So for some, it's just attachment issues. So difficulties with mum and dad and separation. You know, I work with a lot of people who have got issues from having sent to boarding school, and sometimes it's due to the creative pursuits themselves. So artists often have a certain temperament, especially frontmen definitely have a certain temperament, and lead guitarists as well. And within that artistic or creative character, there is often some turmoil. It's an old cliche, but I guess it's a cliche because it's true. And that can often be due to existential issues, relational issues, systemic issues from family and upbringing or environmental. But those aspects often are underneath addiction, and they are, like you said, very broad, and they don't necessarily need to be the sort of severe, sexual abuse or violence or anything like that. They can be things that are a lot more subtle but not necessarily causing any less harm.
Yeah. So what do we do then, Ronnie? How can we support, and maybe John as well could jump in on this, how do we support our artists? How do we support our crew out on the road when they're struggling? They've got another 50 dates to do. Let's assume everything's going to get back to normal. And how do we, or how have you, Ronnie, dealt with that in the past when you're halfway through a tour and there's a meltdown?
Well, I mean, I had my own meltdown halfway through a tour, and unfortunately, it was quite early recovery for me. And I found that peer pressure, I gave into peer pressure, but I went against everything that I'd kind of been taught. I didn't reach out to anybody, and I think that's the key, is making sure you have if you're going on a tour like that, you have a support network. Do your research. I've toured subsequently, and I've looked in all the towns I'm going to and found out if there's AA meetings, etc. I think now, as John was saying earlier, Zoom is finally sort of something that feels like, I've done a lot of Zoom meetings during this, and I thought I wouldn't really enjoy them, but it was amazing. So hopefully that's something that's really going to change touring. But I think just making sure if you have a sponsor, you check in with your sponsor. The whole thing is, and I think that's why this pandemic has been so hard for people, because it's the opposite to addiction is sobriety. It's connection. It's connection. It's what we need. We need to connect. So I think that's so fundamentally. And I talk to my artists. I've had one of my artists is currently a year sober. Yay!
Amazing.
Another one of my artists was in rehab a year ago, and I just talk to them all the time, remind them that I'm always there. And as I said, I post about it just so that I can be that people can feel there's something there. There's no stigma. Hey, I'm sober. I still enjoy my job. I work in the music industry.
So is that true? Is that true for you, John, as well? Are you sort of, if there's a problem mid-tour, are you jumping in there with I have the solution, don't worry, it's all going to be okay?
Sometimes I do have friends in my crew with John Legend, which is a small crew, that we talk about stuff. My wife had to put the dog down, or my father's in the hospital and I'm over in Europe and what have you. And we'll talk through it. But I know I've never had the support like I have with AA, with members of the program. That's what I need. And I've been trying to keep a very stringent boundary between the artist and myself. I would never consider talking to the artist about this stuff, let alone possibly band members. But, a lot of my trauma has happened in sobriety. Chula made a brilliant point. I got sober in a rehab and I had a therapist, and my core issue was fear of abandonment. And she said, I find it amusing that you've chosen a career where you are now leaving all the time. So I think this career is going to be you working through your abandonment issues. 36 years later, I'm still working on it, but it doesn't have to be one or the other. I'm opening my mind to, I can have a successful, enjoyable career on the road and not have to continue with those issues of abandonment or fear or taking care of my wife at home while I'm abroad. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be one or the other. How can that start to take place? And I think when it comes to people who are in active addiction on tour, I really think that requires professional help, that we could invite in a professional person to help with that.
We've taken sober coaches on tour. in the past with our bands where we've had someone who's in active addiction and needs real help. We've taken, you know, sober coaches on tour, and we've had dry tours, etc. So there's no drinking backstage. So do whatever we can to make, you know, support that artist.
Nice.
Yeah, and I guess that, you know, if somebody's listening that's terrified about going on tour because they don't want to drink, you know, that I think would you say it's really important to make that kind of make that known at the beginning of the tour, or, you know, even if they're frightened of maybe not getting the gig sort of thing, or being pushed aside, rather than being out there on the road and then just all of a sudden being ostracized because everyone else is partying?
Yeah, and I think if an artist should feel that, you know, first and foremost, they should be able to talk to their manager about this up front. Like, I'm worried, and what can be done, and, you know, and if your manager says, oh, you know, it's not 1985. If your manager sort of has a problem with that, that's not the right manager for you. They should be doing everything they can to make you, you know, to make this tour a safe place to be. You know, it's work. It's you know, it's your job. You know.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for saying that. That's so important. And obviously, when we are on tour or when we are at home during lockdown, there are quite a few ways that we can help ourselves and, you know, help our mental health and well-being. One of those being the Thrive app. Adam, could you just walk us through really briefly about, you know, what it is and what it does?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a number of things, but within it, it's a sort of 24/7 self-management tool. So it gives you the ability to self-manage, which is really important for some people who want a discreet intervention. So maybe they don't want other people to know that they're struggling with something in particular. They want to use it on their own terms. So it's something they can just pick up and use. And within it, we've got pretty much all of the techniques that we would use in a clinical setting. So in terms of somebody who's maybe having cravings or urges to use, there's lots of mindfulness, meditation-based exercises which will help you surf the urge and get to a point where you're able to feel as though you've got a lot more control over a craving and an urge. But there's a whole CBT program that, I mean, we've been talking a lot about, you know, sometimes there's an underlying issue that started the pattern of behavior that then became out of control. So there's a whole CBT program that allows you to really look at things like negative thinking patterns that you might have developed over the years. And it asks you to sort of reevaluate how you view yourself, how you view your relationships with other people and your place in the world. So I guess the big difference is that this is really something that you can use as a self-management tool. So for people who are in sustained recovery or trying to achieve sustained recovery, it can almost act like a recovery checkup tool. Not everybody wants to go to mutual aid meetings, even though they're really important and really, you know, a good sense of support for people. Some people still want the discretion of being able to help themselves. So it really sort of allows the person to choose when they want to help themselves. And there's a lot of content that's sort of CBT based as well.
Amazing. Oh, thank you so much for that, and your continued work. I'm actually we have a lot of questions. I don't know, Lynn, if you can fire, here we go, fire them through. We've got a load of questions. We've got, okay. We've got one from Pete Toms. How can I view the webinar afterwards? Peter, if you keep an eye on the Music Support's website and social media channels, we'll be sharing all the webinars there in the near future. Marcus Smith, is there evidence that those, hi Marcus, is there evidence that those with one particular long-standing addiction are now also adopting addictive behaviour in other areas due to the pandemic, i.e. long-standing alcoholic now turning to drugs? A diversification of addictions. Chula, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, sure. I'm not really, I don't know if there's actual statistical evidence to prove that.
Yeah.
I know that I'm definitely seeing that And in fact, I'm doing it myself. So I'm definitely having more sugar and,
Yes.
eating too much bad food and shopping. And my wife was exclaiming that there was just yet another delivery at the door. What are you buying? Why are you buying things? So, it's that need to self-soothe, that need to self-regulate and feel contained in what is, we're in an Orwellian dystopian nightmare. So it's going to happen, isn't it? We're going to get to this place where our addictions, even though, I've been in recovery for a while now and I haven't had a drink or a drug for a long, long time. I quit smoking, luckily, 5 years ago, but it took me that long in recovery to do it. But my addiction can pop up on anything. And as I think I said at the beginning, it happens when I'm under stress. And this is a stressful situation, and people's careers, jobs, livelihoods, families, rent, mortgages, it's under threat, and we're worried and we don't know what's going to happen. And not just to us or the person next door, but to the human race. I mean, we're in a situation here.
Yeah.
So that's going to put, some existential angst onto the whole thing. And I think it's only natural that people will turn to things to comfort them. And if you're an addict, you've got to be really careful with that. I know I do. I mean, I have to, get somehow. I mean, I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking I might need to be abstinent from sugar because I just can't seem to really, bring it down to the level where it's healthy. And if that's what I have to do, that's what I'm going to have to do. And it's definitely happening. Whether there's evidence and statistics, I don't know.
Yeah, no, good. I hope that clears that up for you, Marcus. We've got an anonymous question here. I am aware that I was drinking too much. I've cut back, but I don't want to give up altogether. I still do have a drink, though not every day. Would you class this as an alcohol problem? John, do you want to answer that?
Nobody can tell me if I'm an alcoholic. Only I can. And I know how to fool myself. I had to learn, not everybody who drinks is an alcoholic. I never could moderate. There was no such thing. But the reason it works is because I took the first step. I admitted I am powerless over this and I need help. There's an old saying, a pregnant woman doesn't wonder if she's pregnant. Denial's a tricky thing. I really, but I don't like to get into the medical side of things. It makes me nervous, but
I know for me, when I tried that anonymous, it didn't work. I couldn't cut back. I tried everything. We've heard it. If those of us have been in recovery a while, we tried changing what we drank or used. We tried, changing the amount, stopping altogether. Until I got a period of sobriety where I could clear my mind and then deal with some underlying stuff. I couldn't stay sober. So I hope. Go on, John. Yeah.
I was going to say one last thing, and I tell people in Gamblers Anonymous this: if you're not convinced, go try some controlled gambling.
Right.
And I love it when someone says, I have hit the bottom. I have exhausted all resources. I went into the wall, and that's what it took to prove to myself. I've watched guys come out of prison after 3 years for embezzling millions of dollars and still question if they have a problem.
Yeah.
It's the insidiousness of the disease.
Yeah, absolutely.
I read
Ronnie?
an interesting book when I was Googling for the 7,000th time, am I an alcoholic? Do I have a drinking problem? And this book came up, The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober. And that was the catalyst for me. It was an amazing book, brilliantly written. It was a woman. And it suggested this sort of 3-month abstinence, not the 1 month, because they don't really get it. It's this six days thing, and just see how you feel. And I found a lot of reading really helped me really sort of come to terms with it.
Great, thank you. I hope that helps, Anonymous. Next question is from Darbs. I've been in dance music about as long as Ronnie, and it was always about the party. Unfortunately, being a guest at the party became being the gatecrasher. Personally, the 12-step program doesn't work for me. I know I have a problem, and I know it has to be treated. I've used different methods which have worked, but not having access to them during lockdown has been really tough. I've slipped, but not relapsed. Is that a decent perspective to have? Adam, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I think that might represent some people's experience where they've tried a mutual aid organisation and it just hasn't been the right fit for them. I think sometimes you almost have to shop around and maybe go to different types of meetings and find what works for you. And it doesn't work for everybody. Some people just don't really like that approach. I think obviously it depends what that person's goal is. If they want to work towards abstinence, then yeah, they may want to sort of try and reach out to their GP or their local treatment service to see what support they can get. Yeah, a lapse doesn't necessarily mean a relapse, and there's an opportunity to learn from the lapse and try and prevent it from happening again. I think that's the best way and the healthiest way just to view those events. They're just opportunities to learn and to sort of re-examine why you found yourself in that position, and then, you know, put relapse prevention strategies in place so that you don't end up going completely back to how you were before.
Yeah, and I guess just remembering that tomorrow is a new day. We can start again, you know, we can start again now. You know, if we've just had a drink and we go, oh no, what have I done? We can start again right now. You know, we can spend a week beating ourselves up about it, or we can just, you know, try again. Yeah. And so thanks for that. Another interesting question here, for another anonymous question. In fact, a lot of them are, but for Adam and Chula, she says, or he says, I hope this question isn't too off topic, but I'm wondering if Chula and Adam have experienced a strong link between ADHD and addiction in their clinical practices. I am an ADHD ASD transformational coach and a pro musician for 30 years, and I'm meeting more and more clients who are in the 12-step program. Chula, is there a link between ADHD, ASD and addiction?
From my perspective, the link is that many people with ADHD use substances or addictive disorders to try and manage the ADHD. So especially if it hasn't been diagnosed at a young age, often in teenage years, people will find something, whether it's substances or process addictions, to try and manage the ADHD. And in fact, it's quite interesting, that question, and I hadn't thought about this, but at any one time, I always have 2 or 3 people in my caseload, which is of about 25, who have ADHD. And also not just ADHD, but dyslexia and dyspraxia. And you might argue, is it the actual ailment itself that has caused the addiction, or is it because it was undiagnosed and that person used addictive disorders to cope with it, or is it a more emotional experience of having the ailment? So it's really difficult to tell or pinpoint exactly what that connection is, but I would say there definitely is a connection.
Yeah, would you tend to agree with that, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think we you know, a lot of people are getting diagnosed with attention deficit disorder as an adult rather than as a young person. I mean, we see such a high prevalence of comorbid disorders anyway with this population. I think, you know, depending on what study you read, it's between 30 to 80%. So in addition to having a problem with either drugs or alcohol, there's a comorbid disorder alongside it. And yes, it's hard to know which one came first, and to some extent, it doesn't matter. It's trying to manage both at the same time. And I think we heard earlier that, you know, we know that adverse childhood experiences, for example, is such a big predictor for later addictive disorders. So yeah, you will probably see lots of comorbid disorders that are either untreated or haven't been accurately diagnosed, because it's still really difficult to get into mental health services if you're actively using. So sometimes people don't get the support from mental health teams because they're still using. So yeah, I can imagine that it's the case that people have multiple diagnoses that may not be accurately detected.
Yeah, catch-22, isn't it? And you could easily have a full webinar on that, just that, you know, connection on its own. Comment from Eugene Farrer: the 12 steps are not free of criticism. There's a risk of a collective narrative superseding specific needs of an individual. 12-step groups vary anonymously. There are examples of loyalty to the doctrine as opposed to a person-centered means of supporting the specific needs of an addict. Personally, GA compounded my own issues, and leaving experiencing incredible peer support was seminal in recovery from gambling addiction. I'm not sure what the question is in there, but John, do you want to jump in on that? Do you feel like the needs of the addict are supported within the anonymous group, or is it just the support of a doctrine? You know?
Absolutely, it's the fellowship of the program is enormous.
Yeah.
I just find it fascinating that we continue to look for an excuse or a way out. I mean, I was thinking, if I had logged on to this to watch this, I have to ask myself, why did I? Is there something in me that's asking for help? Or why did a participant leave this conversation? Because they heard something that may have rang true. I mean, the break in that process for me has never come in a warm, fuzzy, loving way. It's coming through painful, shocking realizations. This is not easy.
Yeah,
but
which is the thing that we want to run away from. It's the thing that we want to numb, isn't it?
Of course, but it is, and I'd love to tell you, you know, you get sober, you're going to have a life that you've never dreamed of, and the experiences you can't even fathom. But that won't even do it. You know, I mean, it's until I'm in enough pain, then I will ask for help. And that continues for me in recovery. But I will tell you, honestly, I have a sense of contentment and serenity in my life that I've never known possible. And the pandemic has been the greatest gift I've ever had. It has been my girl's ready to go out for a walk.
She's telling you, it's ready. 7 o'clock, time to go.
I just think that if I'm listening to this conversation, I really need to take a minute and ask myself, why am I listening to this? Why? Yeah. There's something in me that needs something from this or wants something from this.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, great answer. Thank you. Please discuss the next one. Please discuss how many. Are you guys okay for time? We're nearly at the 7 o'clock mark, but we've got loads of questions, and I don't think we'll get through all of them. And if you want to chime out, please do so. Don't feel like you have to stay, but I'd love to go on like another 10 or 15 minutes if we can, just because there's so many questions coming in and 60 people still on listening to it. So I think that's a great sign that we're doing something right here, you know. Again, another anonymous question. Could you discuss how musicians and crew get into addiction? Is it past role models issue, the Charlie Parker syndrome, ? Personal family dynamic? I mean, I think we covered that one really with the sort of levels of trauma, Chula, do you think? I think we've covered that.
Well, it's complex. I don't think you can really say it's one particular thing for one individual. It could be many things for one individual, and it can be one thing for many individuals. So it's really, you know, it's broad, and I think the journey is about discovering what it is for yourself. I know that I came into 12-step recovery, and then at the 2-year mark, I was sailing along. I was enjoying my sobriety. I even did a music diploma in my first 2 years, and and then I got into a relationship, and all my stuff came out, and I kind of hit almost the second rock bottom, and then I had to go into therapy to deal with that. And through that process, I then learned a lot more about what it was that got me there in the first place. So that's an individual journey with, I think, individual differences.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. That's great. Next question. And I've been sober for 14 months now, and I've just been discharged. Put my teeth in. Hang on. I've been sober for 14 months now, and I've just been discharged from my recovery service. I've had very open conversations about this with my artists and those around me. But how do I approach tours, festivals, parties, etc., knowing I'm putting myself into the situations which could potentially be the biggest triggers? I mean, for me, that question was a huge, how am I ever going to enjoy myself? How can I possibly continue my career and have fun if I'm not drinking? And and the simple answer for me was that I wasn't having fun in the end. It was just carnage and horrendous, and I hated myself, and it was horrible. And everything after that was precious, and I'm grateful for it to this day. Ronnie, can I throw that one to you? How did you approach that when you first went back out again to tour? And
yeah, I mean, I had to really feel confident that I felt strong enough, first and foremost, a question I asked myself. And then I always had a strategy. I always made sure I had an exit strategy, so I didn't find myself somewhere where I couldn't get home. So not going to a festival without knowing that I had a lift somewhere, or I drove myself a lot of places, and always had someone I could talk to. That was my thing. So always my thing is someone. I talk to my sponsor. I've got a gig coming up, right? Well, what's your plan going to be, and how are you going to deal with it? And eventually it got to the point where I started having so much more fun when I was out. I was like, God, hold on a minute, this is great. It took a while, but yeah, I think having a strategy, just always making sure you know how you can get home, and it for me was the most important.
And having, I think you said having someone you can talk to, and to me that translates as being able to having someone there that you're able to be vulnerable with, that's not going to judge you or shame you in any way. Because I think if you've got that friend or that person that understands, that you can say, you know what, I'm really struggling in here, in this party, in this venue, whatever, in this tour bus, I'm going to go to bed. To have the person who you're speaking to say, I hear you, go for it. You're not missing out on anything here. Go keep yourself safe, I think is absolutely key. And very difficult when you don't have that sort of support.
And in fact, I had my sort of one big relapse I had was on tour, and I didn't have those resources, and I didn't have anyone to talk to. It was very stressful, and I just sort of started to go, just to shut down, and not having that person to talk to. Yeah,
and then it's just it can be a downward spiral from there, can't it? So, okay, we've got another question from Marcus. If the government were to give the panel £10 million to combat addiction in the music industry, where would they spend it? Would you invest in existing organisations or establish new ones? Adam, you want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean, that still wouldn't be enough. So we'd probably ask for more. Look, I think so the services that are out there are absolutely fantastic, and that's both the charitable sector as well as the traditional NHS services. I've worked across both of them, and they're really welcoming services that really know what they're doing and have a great deal of expertise. So I think it would be a case of sort of giving those services more resource, because they are incredibly busy services and they're really busy jobs. But I think there's also room for more services and to be a bit more creative with how services are organised. So probably a bit of both.
Okay. Chula? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you should say that, because the business that I'm launching at the moment, Azura Minds, the way we're looking at it is by taking a preventative approach. So we're approaching corporate companies. We've got a massive network of very high skilled, qualified and experienced therapists, clinicians, coaches, sober coaches, but also acupuncturists, shiatsu practitioners, yoga teachers, you know, a really holistic kind of network of clinicians. And we're approaching corporates and saying, look, you can't wait until people are in crisis. You can't wait until people are on the floor begging for help. What you need to do is provide a regular health and well-being checkup for all of your people, whether they need it or not, or feel they need it or not, every 6 months, with somebody who knows what they're doing. And then you can pick up on things, pick up on issues before they become problematic. So when someone is starting to drink a bit too much or becoming dependent on drink to deal with maybe stress or something, or when somebody is, you know, suffering from pressure or stress and that's starting to show, or their relationships with others are starting to become difficult, you can catch it before it becomes a complete mess. Why are we waiting? You know, why are we waiting until people are really on the floor before we help them up? Why not kind of try and be there from the beginning? And I think with addicts, especially like myself, I mean, you couldn't have got me anywhere near a rehab before the point when I actually went. But I also do think that if I'd had that sort of intervention sooner, or if it was destigmatized or normalized in some way, then I would have been more inclined to reach out for help a bit sooner. So, you know, it's a difficult thing that I do believe that the addict only gets better once the addict wants to. But at the same time, if the resources are there for somebody to turn to, I think inevitably people would do it sooner.
Fantastic, thank you. A question from, we've got Nick Gosling. Hi everybody, what can a tour and production manager do when advancing tours to be more supportive of band and crew who are sober or are sober curious? John, do you want to jump in on that?
Absolutely. I would love to see where the production manager knows who on his crew is in sobriety. That way we are available to be found. I think that's what's really difficult, is how do I know who's sober? You know, how do I find somebody without breaking my own anonymity or risking that? So I think that could be a very valuable resource. I also think that the owner of the vendors, the sound company, lighting, video company owners, can be involved with their employees who are out and need to make connections. I also feel that if we can get a Zoom, a roadie community going on Zoom, word will spread by word of mouth so quickly that, oh, well, you know, so-and-so on your crew has got a year and a half, or your truck driver or your bus driver. And so I think it's incumbent also upon us with long-term sobriety, or even a little, however much time, to put that out there and to believe that people are looking for us and not to hide, and which is something I need to do. But I think production manager and tour managers should absolutely start getting involved in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so time to be, you know, to have that awareness on tour and to be that person that says, you know what, stand up in front of the whole damn team if you have to and say, look, I'm sober. If anyone's struggling, you know, you can come and talk to me. It's absolutely fine. You know, end of it. That, it could just be that, you know, oh, and by the way, there's a brilliant online meeting if you want to be anonymous, and, you know, yeah, fantastic. I think it is changing. I think it's going to take a little more time, but we people, you know, like yourself, just need to keep, you know, we just need to keep bashing down those doors, you know.
And we need to do it in a way where we're not threatening or uncomfortable to those who enjoy a drink or a smoke, or, you know, I mean, the respect and that balance. These are characteristics these are things that have never been introduced to the life on the road. I think the advance already is incredible. But I think, we need to make that available as much as we can. And and let people know that it's out there. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is we've got one more question here, which is probably a good one to end the questions on. But I just want to come back to you after this to sort of just get one last comment. But what if you're in that position where you're in life or on the road and you don't have that person to talk to? You don't have that person to say, you know, I'm a mess, and you're on your own. What do they do then?
Call music support.
Is the right answer. Yeah, exactly. You're never alone, especially these days. There's a lot of support online. There's a lot of free phone lines. There's so much help now, and you can find all of this help on the musicsupport.org website. We'll be putting more up as time goes by, and you can always fire as a question if your question hasn't been answered, that you want to get an answer to. You can fire it off by email to info@musicsupport.org, and we will try our hardest to get back to you. We will get back to you. Let's say that we will get back to you. So I'd just like to go around just by way of sort of closing up and just get a comment of, you know, when you're in that position of walking through the door and that of into a meeting, or you're thinking of getting sober and you just can't seem to walk, you know, through the door and shake the hand of the greeter or whatever. And what's your advice to somebody, if advice is the right word even, that just can't seem to get there, that can't seem to make that decision? John?
That's a tough one.
Yeah, sorry about that. It is a bit.
I'd like to just say this: if you want it, if you're tired of living the way you've been living, there's help. There's people who understand, and there's a life waiting for you beyond. I mean, it brings me to tears. There's a life beyond your dreams ahead of you, because we know what the alternative is. Mm. We're going to kill ourselves. We're going to, or worse, we're going to live the way we've been living. And so I don't know if it's about courage or fear, like we talked about before. It's about trust. I don't know. You know, you're not alone. We're not alone.
I think we may be, you know, it's getting to that point, isn't it, of just not being able. You've tried everything else and nothing else has worked. So what am I left with, you know? Ronnie, how would you sort of interpret that? Is it the same answer for everyone pretty much? Or?
Yeah, I like that John said, it's about trust. You know, It really is just, you know, trust. And I mean, the first meeting I ever went to, I literally just didn't make any eye contact. I just went in and I just listened, and I'd got to that point. I was, you know, I kept Googling, am I an alcoholic? You know, the constant. And I just thought, I just got in, and it took a lot, but I just thought, you know, I'm just going to go in, and I didn't say anything. And then I didn't go back again for another couple of months. And you know, as John said, I just literally was so tired. I thought, right, there's no more to lose. And I went in and I just sat down and I just looked up, and this minute I just looked up and made eye contact with someone, and someone smiled back. Like that, it was just amazing. And as I said, I found my people. It's like the best pub you've ever been to. Everyone gives you time to talk. Everyone gets a minute to talk. Everyone's there to listen. Yeah. So yeah, just give it a go and trust. Just trust. Because honestly, there is a life beyond your wildest dreams. It really is.
Chula, how do we get over that fear? What are we trusting in when we don't have any faith?
I think the key to it, or one of the best ways in, is to talk to someone in recovery. So find someone who is actually in recovery and just talk to them and just say, you know, what happened to you? And I think from doing that, the trust can build. because it really is. It does take a lot of trust, and unfortunately, addicts often have trust issues. So it's a really hard thing to do. But through the connection with somebody in recovery, that trust starts to build. And yes, we can pick holes in the program, and we can find things in clinicians or clinical approaches that perhaps we don't believe in. But I think when you actually talk to someone, you know, person to person, who's been through it and is in recovery, then you can't deny the truth when it's standing there right in front of you. And you know, there's a few sort of fellowship cliches that I just wanted to throw out, and one of them is, you know, the only thing that people regret about coming into recovery is not doing it sooner.
Yeah.
Other than that, if you speak to anyone in recovery, they don't regret a thing about it because it's that good. And I would also say that, you know, a lot of people feel that they're on their own with it, and they try to deal with their addictions on their own, and it's just not possible. And it's that saying of, you know, only you can do this, but you don't have to do it alone.
Amazing. Amazing. Adam, would you be able to expand on that?
Yeah, I think everything that we've just heard's spot on. I think, you know, just to say to anybody that's listening is unsure about whether or not they should reach out for support, please do so. It's a risk for sure, but as you've just heard, I'm sure you won't regret it. There'll be people there with lived experience who've been exactly where you've been, who will help you and will support you. And just stepping in and talking to someone, I think, is going to make such a difference.
Amazing. Well, it just leaves me enough time to sort of say thank you so much to everybody for joining me. I hope those of you that tuned into this got something out of it, especially those of you that are maybe on the fence of recovery and active addiction. You know, I hope this helps you to sort of walk over that threshold into sobriety. Music support is there for you if you need it. And massive thanks to the team at Music Support, Lynn and Eric, and Matt, who did the first webinar on men's mental health, which you can also check out on the music.org website. That's really it's a really good chat and worth a listen. We're available as usual on all of the social networks and all of that stuff, which you can find on the music.org website as well. Look out for the next one. We do intend to make more of these. I think they're really interesting and important, and certainly quite vital when it comes, you know, to issues like how do I get and stay sober. You know, it's a very simple thing, but it's also can be a very complicated and frightening thing as well. But like everybody said on our panel, you're not alone. There is help there for you. You just need to reach out and take it. So thank you, Ronnie, Chula, Adam and John, for your insights and your wonderful wisdom and knowledge. And don't forget to tune into the next one, whenever that is. I think probably, and I don't know. I'm not going to say because I don't know, but tune into it anyway. Thanks a lot for listening and take care.